On a wet Saturday night in May 1977, a British Army captain in a brown leather jacket walked out of a pub called the Three Steps Inn in a village called Dromintee, 3 miles from the Irish border in South Armagh. In the car park, 7 men were waiting for him. The captain was 31 years old, 6 feet tall, an Oxford history graduate, a Catholic, a boxer, a falconer, a serving officer of the Grenadier Guards on attachment to a British Army unit that did not officially exist. The 7 men who were waiting for him were a Provisional IRA active service unit, and they had been told he was the man who had been sitting at the bar for 3 hours pretending to be one of them. What happened in the car park took 15 minutes and required every one of the 7 men. By dawn, the captain was dead in a forest across the border in the Republic. By dawn, his body was already gone. His name was Robert Nairac. The men who knew what he actually was have, almost to a man, refused to talk about it. Until now. The pub was called the Three Steps. The village was called Dromintee. The road outside ran for 1.25 miles to the border at Flurrybridge, and after that it ran into the Republic of Ireland, and after that the British Army could not follow. The proprietor was a man named Desmond McCreish. The publican knew most of the men in the bar that night. The publican did not know the captain. Almost nobody did. The captain had told everyone in the pub that his name was Danny McCurlane. He had told them he was a motor mechanic from the Ardoyne district of North Belfast. He had told them he was a member of the official IRA. None of this was true. The real Daniel McCurlane had been on the run from the security services since 1974 and would himself be killed by the Provisional IRA in June of the following year. The captain was wearing his stolen name like a borrowed coat. The captain had been at the bar of the Three Steps for nearly 3 hours. He had bought drinks, he had played pool, he had sung 2 Republican songs with the live band, and several of the regulars had clapped him on the back when he finished. He left the pub at approximately 11:45 at night. He walked out alone, into the car park, into a wet South Armagh dark. He never came back. To understand how a serving British officer ended up walking unarmed and unaccompanied into the most dangerous border village in the United Kingdom, you have to go back nearly 29 years, to an island in the Indian Ocean, and to a Catholic doctor's family that had no connection to soldiering at all. Robert Lawrence Nairac was born on the 31st of August 1948 in Mauritius, then a British Crown colony. His father, Maurice Nairac, was a French Mauritian Catholic, an ophthalmic surgeon who would in time become a consultant eye surgeon in the north of England, first at Sunderland Eye Infirmary and later at Gloucester Royal Hospital. His mother, Barbara Dykes, was English and Anglican. The marriage joined 2 faiths in the household. The children were raised Catholic. There were 4 children. Robert was the youngest. He had 2 older sisters, Rosamond and Gabrielle, both of whom are still alive at the time of this recording, and both of whom have been waiting 49 years for news of where their brother is buried. He had 1 older brother, David, who died of a heart inflammation in 1962 when Robert was 13. The Nairac family had already buried 1 son. The English address of the family, when Robert went away to school, was an unfussy professional household. The father drove to surgery in the mornings and saw patients whose vision he was trying to save. The mother kept the house. The youngest son went in due course to Gilling Castle, a Catholic preparatory school in the Yorkshire countryside, and from there to Ampleforth College, the Catholic boarding school attached to the Benedictine Abbey of St Lawrence, the school that the British press has, in its way, called the Catholic Eton. At Ampleforth, Robert Nairac became, by every account, exactly the kind of boy that the school had been designed to produce. He was head of house. He was captain of the school boxing team. He won colours in 5 sports. He took up falconry. He took up wildfowling and fly fishing and bird watching. He read history with serious intent. The young man who left Ampleforth in 1968 had been built into a particular kind of English Catholic gentleman. And that construction was, in due course, going to function as a cover identity. He went up to Lincoln College, Oxford, in the autumn of 1968 to read history, medieval and military history, depending on which source you read, the difference being mostly the title of the paper rather than the subject of his interest. He came down with a second-class degree in 1971. He had won 4 Oxford Blues for boxing against Cambridge. He had almost single-handedly revived the Oxford University Amateur Boxing Club, which had been moribund. And he had kept, in his college rooms, a live hawk, which had previously been used in the filming of the Ken Loach film, Kes. Lincoln College's senior tutor, when asked about the bird, is said to have reported that he had decided not to ask. But the question that nobody in the college bar in 1971 could have answered was why an old Amplefordian, a Catholic, the son of an immigrant surgeon, with an Irish romantic streak and a private taste for birds of prey, was about to apply to the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, and from there to the Senior Infantry Regiment of the British Army, the Grenadier Guards. The polite answer was that he had always wanted to soldier. The longer answer is that the qualities Ampleforth had instilled in him were qualities the British Army was, at exactly that moment, beginning to look for in a new way. Nairac was commissioned into the 2nd Battalion of the Grenadier Guards in the spring of 1972. Within a year, he was in Belfast. His first tour of Northern Ireland began on the 5th of July 1973 and ended on the 31st of October. He served as a platoon commander in No. 1 Company, 2nd Battalion Grenadier Guards. His patrol area was split between the Protestant Shankill Road and the Catholic Ardoyne. He went out on foot patrols. He drank off-duty in the messes that British officers drank in. He listened. He had, almost immediately, started to learn West Belfast. He had an Irish accent that his colleagues, by every later account, found laughable. He had a private capacity to switch into something more convincing when nobody from his own side was listening. When the 2nd Battalion left Belfast for Hong Kong on the 31st of October 1973, Captain Nairac did not go with them. He stayed behind on attachment as a liaison officer for the incoming battalion. That decision is the first place the official record begins to thin out. By 1974, he had been selected into 14 Intelligence Company. The unit had been formed formally in 1974. It officially did not exist. Its cover designation in South Armagh was 4 Field Survey Troop, Royal Engineers. Its actual function was to put trained soldiers in civilian clothing into Republican social space, pubs, side streets, betting shops, taxi ranks, to observe, recruit and run intelligence assets in territory that uniformed soldiers could not safely enter. It would, 2 decades later, evolve into the Special Reconnaissance Regiment. In 1974, it was new, it was experimental, and it was being built around men like Robert Nairac. He was promoted captain on the 4th of September 1975. The unit operated in South Armagh out of Bessbrook Mill, a converted 19th-century linen mill 14 miles from Crossmaglen and a short helicopter flight from anywhere in what the British government had quietly started to call Bandit Country. Bessbrook was a fortress sitting inside a battle space. From it, in 1976 and 1977, the SAS and the DET and military intelligence pushed out into an operating area that had become the most dangerous square mile in the United Kingdom. Nairac was a liaison officer at Headquarters 3 Infantry Brigade. He was, on paper, an administrator. He was, in practice, doing something else. A future Conservative Member of Parliament, Patrick Mercer, was a young officer at Bessbrook in this period. He drove Nairac into the border pubs more than once. Mercer's later account is one of the very few first-person testimonies we have. He never told us anything, Mercer recalled. He just said, "Come back in a couple of hours, or I'll call you," though I don't know how he was going to call me because he never carried a radio. A couple of times we managed to intercept him when he came out of the bar. A couple of times he just wandered back into camp without his weapon. The men around him at Bessbrook believed he was attached to the SAS. He was not, formally. But the line in 1976 and 1977 between the DET and the regiment, between 14 Intelligence Company and the squadrons working alongside it, was a line drawn in pencil and then rubbed out. To the men at Bessbrook, the captain who walked into Republican bars alone with a bad accent and no radio was, for all operational purposes, what they called him, a Hereford man. He was as close as the British Army had in that summer to a single point of intelligence contact in South Armagh. And then, on Saturday the 14th of May 1977, he drove out of Bessbrook Mill at 9:30 in the evening in a red Triumph Toledo towards the border, alone. What happened next is what makes this single operation the most studied in the entire history of British clandestine work in the province. He arrived at the 3 Steps Inn at around 10 o'clock. It was not his first visit. He had been in the pub 2 or 3 nights earlier. He was wearing a brown leather jacket, jeans, and a donkey jacket over the top. His hair was deliberately long and unkempt. He carried a 9mm Browning automatic pistol on his belt. He was using the Macalane identity. He had no backup vehicle on standby in the village. He had no radio. For 3 hours he played the part. He bought rounds. He played pool. He sang. He took the microphone with the band when invited and gave a hard-edged rendition of 2 Republican ballads, and the regulars at the bar bought him a drink for it. Sitting at one of the tables, watching him, was a man called Terry McCormick. McCormick was from Newry. He was a boxer. He had been a champion at multiple levels in Ireland and the United Kingdom. He had links to the Provisional movement, although he was not, technically, a sworn volunteer. And the longer McCormick listened to the captain at the bar, the less the accent worked. At a certain point, just before 11, McCormick walked out of the pub and made a phone call. By the time Nairac walked out of the 3 Steps at 11:45, the men in the car park had been told he was a security force operator pretending to be a Catholic. What followed in the car park was not, by any sober account, a one-sided ambush. The captain was a serving Grenadier Guards officer with an Oxford boxing blue, formal military training and 4 years of operational experience in the province. The first man to put hands on him was Terry McCormick. McCormick swung. Nairac swung back. As they grappled, McCormick heard a metallic clatter on the wet tarmac. He shouted for help. The pistol had come out of Nairac's belt and was, briefly, on the ground. It took every man in the car park to subdue him. The fight ran for several minutes. By the time it was over, the Browning had been kicked under a vehicle, the captain had been pistol-whipped into semi-consciousness, and the 7 men were bundling him into a car for the run to the border. The car was a Ford Cortina. 47 years later, hair from the back seat of that Cortina would still be the strongest physical evidence against one of the kidnap party. The drive across the border at Flurry Bridge took less than 10 minutes. The British Army stopped at the line.
The car did not.
They turned off the road into Ravensdale Forest in the north of County Louth, and they dragged the captain out of the back seat and onto wet pine needles in the dark. What happened over the next several hours in Ravensdale Forest has been pieced together from Liam Townsend's confession to the Garda, from the testimony of others convicted in Belfast Crown Court, and from the physical evidence later collected at the scene. They beat him with their fists. They beat him with sticks. They beat him with fence posts. He was kicked in the head and in the body. He was pistol whipped. They wanted, very specifically, the names of his sources and the structure of the British intelligence operation he served. He did not give them his real name. He did not give them his unit. He stayed inside the Danny McAlane cover identity the whole way through. He made several attempts to escape. One account has him wresting a pistol away from a guard and firing it. There is no neat single timeline of this part of the night, because by the end of it, most of the men present were themselves traumatized by what they had been doing. What every serious source agrees on is this: he fought. He kept fighting. He did not give them what they wanted. At a certain point, in the small hours of Sunday the 15th, Terry McCormick, a Catholic and a former altar boy, knelt down beside the bleeding captain and pretended to be a priest. He told the captain that he had been called to hear his last confession. He told the captain to make peace with God. The captain, according to McCormick's later account, said, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." But he did not tell the false priest who he really was. He did not tell the false priest what he had been doing in Dromintee. He went under the alias still. By around 3 in the morning, the men in the forest had realized that they were not going to break him, and that they could not now let him go. A telephone call was made. A provisional IRA volunteer named Liam Townsend was driven to the scene. Townsend was 24 years old. He was from the village of May outside Newry. He carried a handgun. Townsend would later tell the Garda that he pointed the pistol at the back of the captain's head and pulled the trigger, and the gun misfired. He pulled the trigger again. It misfired again. The third pull was the one that killed Robert Nairac. The body was loaded back into a vehicle and driven away. Senior figures in the South Armagh Brigade were brought in to handle disposal. The men who had been in the forest were sent home. The captain's body has not been seen since. The Royal Ulster Constabulary established by Sunday morning that Captain Nairac had failed to return to Bessbrook. The Garda Síochána in the Republic opened an investigation almost immediately. Within weeks, Liam Townsend had been arrested. Within months, he had made 2 admissible confessions. The first, made around the time of his arrest, began with a sentence that would be printed in every newspaper in the United Kingdom and Ireland. "I shot the British captain. He never told us anything. He was a great soldier." The trial was held in November 1977 at the Special Criminal Court in Dublin. Townsend was convicted of murder. He was sentenced to penal servitude for life. He would serve 13 years. The trial of the South Armagh end of the kidnap party was held in Belfast Crown Court in 1978. Gerard Fearon, 21, and Thomas Morgan, 18, were convicted of murder. Daniel O'Rourke, 33, was acquitted of murder and convicted of manslaughter, 10 years. Michael McCoy, 20, was convicted of kidnap, 5 years. Owen Rocks, 22, was convicted of withholding information, 2 years. Thomas Morgan died in a road accident in 1987, a year after his release. Terry McCormick, the false priest, was never tried. He had already gone. He spent the rest of his life in the United States and died in exile in September of 2021. A man called Pat Maguire, also reportedly in New Jersey, was never extradited. A seventh man, Kevin Crilly, was extradited from the United States 27 years after the killing. He was tried at Belfast Crown Court in April 2011 and acquitted on all 5 counts. The judge ruled that his admissions to the BBC Spotlight programme did not, on the evidence, amount to knowing participation in murder. On the 13th of February 1979, the London Gazette published a supplement at page 1991. The supplement contained a citation on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen for the posthumous award of the George Cross to Captain Robert Nairac, Grenadier Guards. The citation read, in part, that he had been subjected to a succession of exceptionally savage assaults in an attempt to extract information. It read that these efforts to break Captain Nairac's will failed entirely. It read that he had committed acts of the greatest heroism in circumstances of extreme peril. The medal was presented to his parents and to his elder sister Rosamond at Buckingham Palace on the 1st of May of that year. Within the regiment, within 14 Intelligence Company, within the small community of British soldiers and officials who knew what Robert Nairac had actually been doing, there was a second response, less public and more consequential. The way Nairac had been lost, alone, unarmed in practical terms, in a hostile village on a Saturday night, with no functional backup, became the test case. The doctrine that came out of it can be summarised in 3 rules. Never alone. Cover for status, not cover for operation. And a standing escape protocol, drilled and rehearsed, for the moment a cover identity collapses. 14 Intelligence Company was, over the next decade, rebuilt around those 3 rules. The unit was renamed and reorganised, eventually into the Special Reconnaissance Regiment that still exists. Every det operator since 1977 has, in a meaningful sense, lived inside the safety architecture that the death of Robert Nairac obliged the British Army to build. There is one set of questions about Robert Nairac that this account has so far avoided, and a serious treatment of his case cannot avoid them entirely. In the years after his death, a sequence of allegations emerged that linked him to atrocities committed by loyalist paramilitaries. The Miami showband killings of July 1975, the Dublin and Monaghan bombings of May 1974, the assassination of the Provisional IRA Belfast Brigade officer John Francis Green in January 1975. The allegations were made by, among others, the former intelligence officer Fred Holroyd, the former Army information officer Colin Wallace, and, on the floor of the House of Commons in 1987, the then Labour MP Ken Livingstone. The counter-evidence is also substantial. Alistair Kerr, in his 2015 biography Betrayal, produced documentary evidence placing Nairac on a road journey from London to Scotland at 4 a.m. on the day of the Miami showband killings. The Barron report in the Republic established that the Polaroid photograph Holroyd claimed Nairac had shown him of John Francis Green's body had in fact been taken by a Garda officer the morning after the killing. A chronology Holroyd's claim does not survive. Jeff Knupfer, the lead investigator at the Independent Commission for the Location of Victims' Remains, has said, on the record, "We've not found one shred of evidence to support what are effectively wild allegations that he was involved in murder and mayhem." Other documentary material released by the Ministry of Defence in January 2020 has been read by some as suggesting closer involvement. The matter is, at the time of this recording, the subject of live litigation in the United Kingdom. This script will not pick a side. What can be said with confidence is that the allegations rest on contested testimony, that Nairac's primary documented work was the running of intelligence assets in Republican social space, and that the men who knew him best, Patrick Mercer at Bessbrook, William Burke, who worked alongside him before becoming a priest, the Garda officers who took Townsend's confession, describe a soldier who took his Catholicism seriously and who, on the worst night of his life, did not break. We come in the end to the body. In 1999, the Provisional IRA, under the framework of the Good Friday Agreement, communicated to the families of the disappeared a list of locations where bodies could be searched for. Robert Nairac was on the list. The location given was, in effect, "We have no information." 25 years later, in August 2024, the Independent Commission for the Location of Victims' Remains opened the first physical excavation specifically for Captain Nairac, at a piece of farmland near Fort in County Louth, 55 miles north of Dublin. The search closed, unsuccessfully, on the 16th of October the same year. The lead investigator, John Hill, confirmed publicly that the information had come from a former Provisional IRA source and that the area searched was less than a single acre. The joint statement from the commissioners ended with a single sentence directed at the family. "Our thoughts are with the Nairac family, in particular his sisters Rosamond and Gabrielle. Both sisters are now in their 80s. Jeff Knupfer's working theory, given in a television interview in 2018, can be quoted directly. "We have it on good authority that he was buried, and his body was then moved from that location and reburied somewhere else, and maybe even reburied yet again." There is one other thing worth saying, because the people who repeat the meat grinder story have rarely been corrected on the record. In June of 2007, the BBC's Spotlight programme conducted a detailed investigation of the claim, sourced originally to the former IRA intelligence officer Eamon Collins, that the body had been disposed of in a meat processing plant near Dundalk. The programme concluded that the claim was a myth. Knupfer, who would know if anyone would, has consistently called the more lurid theories wild allegations. The most likely truth is the simpler and the harder one. He is buried somewhere in Republic of Ireland soil, within a few miles of the border, in ground that has been disturbed at least once, and possibly more, by men who took the burial knowledge with them when they died. Robert Nairac is buried, if buried is the right word, somewhere on the Republic side of the Newry to Dundalk border. The eye surgeon father, in his Belfast surgery, died in 1995, never having been told where his son's body went. The army that sent the captain to Dromintee is on its third or fourth generation of soldiers since the night he disappeared. The unit he served in has been disbanded, reformed, renamed, and disbanded again. The men who worked with him do not write memoirs. There will not be another like him. And there is no monument.